everyone, welcome back. Today I have a very special interview for you with the extremely lovely and intelligent Eva Vlaardingenbroek. Eva is a Dutch political commentator and legal philosopher, and she has been kind enough to join me to discuss her outspoken support of the Dutch farmer protests in the Netherlands. Eva, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy that you're back on the scene.
Yes, me too. Me too. Although the break was really good for me, as I've already stated. But to get into this interview, there's a lot that I want to talk about because I only know broadly about this situation, and I think a lot of other people it's the same. To start off, for those who are unaware, can you please explain the plan that the Dutch government announced? It was back in June in order to reduce nitrogen emissions and how exactly this affects the Dutch farmers.
Right. Yeah. So back in June, when this all started, or actually, I shouldn't say it all started then because our government has been after our farms for a while. We already had major protests in 2019. So it's important to note that there's like a buildup here of our government trying to make our farmers' life very, very difficult. But in June of 2000 of this year, they came forward with a really radical plan, which basically stated to lower the nitrogen emissions before 2030, because those are the goals that they want to obtain. We need to cut livestock by at least 30%. So cutting the livestock of farmers just nationwide by 30% would mean that the majority of them would go immediately out of business. So it was a very radical plan, and it would mean the bankruptcy and the end of these farmers' endeavor. And not just that, the government's also the one seizing the land. So they would be expropriated, forcefully bought out by the state for very bad prices. So that's like an interesting thing to note here, is that it's not just about obviously lowering the nitrogen emissions. I doubt that whole concept in general. But the farmers wouldn't be free to then sell their land to whomever they wanted to. They have to sell it to the state. So that's
Right.
what
Is it clear? Is it clear what the state wants to do with this land? Like, why would they just seize it?
Well, they're very unclear about what the reason is, apart from in some provincial documents. So that's where they tell the truth, right? On a national level, they won't do it, but then in some sort of documents that they think nobody will see, it very clearly was stated in one of them that they needed the land in order to build new houses, because the Dutch population is growing rapidly, not because the Dutch people are having a ton of babies, but we have about 1,000 more or less of migrants coming in every week. So this year we broke another migration record of it was 300,000 people coming in 1 year.
Wow.
So basically we're seeing higher numbers now than in the 2015 refugee crisis. So we're either still in a perpetual crisis, but nobody, describes it that way. Or it's not so much of a crisis. It's very active policies on the behalf of our government, and they need the land to build new houses. It's that simple.
But that's also much more massive, 300,000 a year, than people realize, because I mean, the Netherlands is not that big of a country. It's like what, 17, 18 million total population?
Yes, and and we are very densely populated. So you might think, 17 million, European country, that's a fair amount. Well, fair amount on a very, very tiny piece of land. So I say this in every interview. If you don't know my country, go and Google it. You'll see it's like a speck on the map. And so it makes sense that, we need land for houses, but to take that of our farmers is not the solution. I would say close the borders and send people who don't belong here back.
And how did the Dutch farmers react to this plan?
So in the summer, they resisted it very courageously. So they started doing protests. They did the type of protest that we don't really often see in almost, I would say, a pacifist country such as the Netherlands. People are very very inclined to follow authority here, I feel like, even though they like to brag about that they don't, but at the end of the day, they do. If the government says you do something, they will do it. So we don't have that, that strike mentality, for example, that you can see in countries like France. So for the farmers to start protesting on such a massive scale, they blocked distribution centers, for example, they blocked roads to the airport, and it caused supermarkets to run empty very quickly. Those types of things were very, I would say, like uncommon for the Dutch political landscape to happen. And so it was major news in obviously in Holland, but also around the rest of the world. And they kept it up for a fair amount of time because obviously the police came in, they broke up the blockades, They even at some point shot at a group of protesters, and
Really?
specifically shot at a 16-year-old kid that was driving away from the protest in his tractor. So things got out of hand pretty quickly. And it's not the type of stuff that you would think would happen in a liberal democracy, where people are peacefully protesting, because this was all, even though there was strong protest, there was no violence at all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as we've seen, they're not that tolerant of the type of protests, I mean, all around the world that they politically disagree with. It's only those that, follow their narrative. In light of these massive protests, has the Dutch government shown, I mean, maybe you've already answered this, but any signs at all whatsoever of backing down, or are they willing to destroy here just the livelihoods of countless Dutch farmers?
Yeah, not an inch. They didn't budge at all. So that was what was so incredibly disappointing about this. And again, shows you that democracy does not function, because our leaders, they don't care about the protests. They don't care about the civil unrest that it caused. Obviously, there are a lot of people who say that this is wrong. Like the majority of the Dutch population, for example, supports the farmers, but our government's just like, no, 2030 agenda, the goals are sacred. That's what they said. And they continued on with it. So what they then do, it's the typical strategy always with these people, is they'll start vilifying the protesters in the media, which happens. The mainstream media is now talking about how the farmers are quite literally turning into terrorists. That those are the types of words that they use. And so they basically hope that the public opinion on the farmers shift, and they drag it out. So they said over the summer, we're gonna revise the plan. We're gonna come back with you with a new proposal. And that's what they did a couple of weeks ago. They came back with a new proposal that wasn't new at all. It was just nicer in tone. So, it was like, they just hid certain things a little better. They used kinder words. And then down the line, it was actually worse. Now they don't say, okay, we're cutting 30% of all the livestock before 2030. We're just going to now target the top emitters. That's what they said. So the companies, they say companies now, not farmers, but companies that emit the most nitrogen. And those are going to go first, which will amount to over 600 farmers being shut down in the next year.
Wow.
So not even 2030 now, just like, okay, we're going to target very specific groups and we're going to forcefully buy them out first.
Why is it that you think the Dutch government are specifically targeting the Dutch farmers? Because, why are they getting all of the blame for this? Because, for example, cars also emit nitrogen. So why not ban all of the cars then? If they're really serious about this climate agenda.
Right. Or airplanes, like Schiphol, for example, emits more nitrogen, all of these things. It's just, when you ask the logical questions, you discover what their motive is. That's the only explanation I have for this. So any type of rational argument is dismissed by the government. Even when farmers talk, for example, about lowering nitrogen emissions through new technological advancements, things like that, they say, no. So it is about the land. That's the central idea here. They want the land. The farmers don't have an option to sell to anyone else. So it is about the state confiscating the land. And there are two reasons for that. One of them obviously being the one we just mentioned, migration. You can't have mass migration coming to your country, not closing the borders, and then expect that people can just, live on the street. So you need to buy houses, buy land to build houses, because our country's packed. So it's mass migration. That's one. And the other one, I think, is a more general theme, where it is a very good strategy for a state to control the food supply in order to control the people. And farmers are incredibly independent people. They have a very lucrative business also in the Netherlands, because we're incredibly good at it. So often these farmers have had their businesses in their family for centuries on end. It's in our culture, it's in our history. We are a farmers nation, and we're super good at it, because we are the second largest exporter of agricultural products in the world, even though we're such a tiny country, right after the US. So we're doing this very, very well. And I feel like not just, the fact that they produce the food, the fact that they have cattle, so, that meat is also being distributed. I think a lot of this revolves around the anti-meat agenda, for example. That's one thing, but it's also just kind of the struggle explaining this, but sort of the essence of farming. They're hard workers. They're often religious. They're honest people. They are independent. You can't really control a farmer. They own the land. they have their businesses. It's a very government independent sector and industry. And I feel like that is a harsh, hard to control group. And so they need to get rid of that group first. And with getting rid of that group, you also get to control a much larger group because you get to control the food supply. So it's basically, yeah, it's two stones. It's a two birds, one stone.
As you mentioned, the Netherlands, despite being quite small, it's one of the world's largest food producers and exporters. So what sort of effect is this going to have on the food supply, not just in the Netherlands, but the countries they export to? I mean, aside from the obvious of the government controlling this food supply, I mean, do you think people are going to see shortages, or what kind of consequences?
Yeah, there are already shortages in the food supply worldwide. And then
Yeah.
coming after your second largest agricultural exporter can have no other consequence than making that worse. So
Mm.
again, when I talk about this, I always say there is malintent in this. These people are malicious because even if it's not in the documents, obviously they're not going to write like, oh, we want to we want to control the food supply to control people. But if you just it's just a simple equation. It's 2 plus 2 equals 4. If you have food shortages everywhere and you're going to come after farmers that produce food, you're going to have more food scarcity. It's that simple. So apparently that's something they want. And I feel like that's a hard concept for a lot of people to grasp, especially in my country where people blindly follow the government and really trust it. So it absolutely it has to have consequences. There's no other way. So they're going to be the only thing that they can do is try and promote what they call alternative forms of protein. And you can
Mhm.
already see that agenda being rolled
Plant-based
out
meat.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Plant-based meat.
Plant-based meat.
Bugs.
Bill Gates. Bill Gates also very funny. Funny, it's not funny at all, but it just shows the corruption of these people. Is the so this might get technical here, but the minister who pushes the nitrogen law that will expropriate all of our farmers, she has a brother-in-law that runs a online supermarket. It's like typically that type of 1984 type of supermarket that arose during COVID where you can't go physically. And they were like, oh, we'll deliver everything to your door because it's safer
Yeah.
this way. And it's cheaper because we don't have to have actual physical supermarkets. And it's totally scary. But anyway, this supermarket is owned by her brother-in-law and got a major investment last year of over 600 million euros from whom? Bill Gates. I remember hearing about that because it was in the press a couple of years ago. And we were like, why would Bill Gates invest such
Mhm.
amounts of money in just a small up and coming, basically, startup in the Netherlands? And now it all makes sense. It all
Yeah.
makes sense.
Because it's a big club and they're all in it working for their own self-interests, and we are inferior and deserve to be controlled in their eyes. At least that's what
Yeah.
it seems like.
Yeah, because
Uh,
they're not the ones that are going to be eating the bugs. They're feeding those to our
well,
children.
they're not following any of the climate rules either, and they're in their private jets and whatever else. So it's just one rule for me and another for thee, basically.
Exactly.
How it
Yeah.
goes. You've been very outspoken in support of the Dutch farmers and their protests. Why did you feel compelled to take this public stance in support of them? Because obviously there have been a lot of consequences for you, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I felt for them first of all because I'm a patriot, so these are my people.
Yeah.
If I can fight for Dutch citizens, I will. And in this case, it's such a group that I have such big sympathy and respect for as well. Like I said, the Dutch farmers are they're very generally speaking very good people. They're honest, hardworking, fair. They form, I would say, in a way, really the hardworking. Middle upper class that really has its hand in the dirt still, quite literally, and works for its money and also does something good for society. So
Mhm.
now they're being vilified as top polluters, which is just a ridiculous idea. It's all nonsense. The nitrogen crisis doesn't exist, only on paper. First of all, the only thing that it does, that they say that it does, is it alters the type of nature that you see. So there's more growth of plants when you have nitrogen. You think that's maybe a good thing, but they're saying, no, we need to protect the land as it is, which who sets that standard, first of all, But so the Dutch farmers, I really personally, I've spoken to many of them. I really feel for them. And the injustice that is being carried out to them is one that is of such an extent that I just felt like this is so utterly wrong. And
Mm.
not just for them, but if we allow our government to do this, if we allow them to say, everything that you've ever worked for is mine the moment I want it, then what makes you think that they will just do that to the farmers and not to ordinary citizens? So it was just a no-brainer for me. It's the most out in the open injustice that I've seen in a very long time coming from our government. So I felt inclined to speak out about it.
And have you faced any sort of repression for this decision?
You know, like yourself, I've been in right-wing politics or in the right-wing debate, conservative debate for a couple of years. So, you know, I've seen it all, I feel like. But with this, yes, definitely, because what I was able to do, what I didn't really do before, was spread this internationally. And if there's one thing that the Dutch government doesn't like, it's people talking about them in a negative way to foreign press, because obviously here they control the press. There is basically no media opposition in the Netherlands. But then if suddenly half of America starts talking about Dutch farmers and their cause, that made them very nervous. So they came after me pretty harshly in the media again, which again, I'm no stranger to it, but it did grow to a new, I'd say, new level. I had Dutch state-funded media call me a supporter of white supremacy because I held a bottle of milk in my hands. You know, it's that type of insanity,
The
really.
symbolism. What did she mean by this?
I mean, like they literally say, "Oh, she holds milk, and that's not as innocent as it seems." There was a photo of mine where I was supporting the farmers, and I went to a local farmer and bought some milk, and they said, "Yeah, this is not just milk. This is a symbol of white supremacy." And she's a far right extremist that propagates all sorts of conspiracy theories, such as the Great Reset and the Great Replacement theory, because claiming that the government needs to build houses for new immigrants is apparently the Great Replacement theory. It's like, that's how they try to frame this now. If you criticize it at all, you're in that camp. And what they're doing now, which I was actually quite shocked about, this week, there was a report that came out that was sent to our parliament about new terrorist threats in the Netherlands. So they were talking about a level 3 terrorist threat, which is like pretty high. And I read the report seeing like, oh, are we talking jihadis? Are we talking the climate activists? Are we talking, far left extremism and violence coming from Antifa? No, of course not. It was all about, again, the farmers were mentioned by name. They said, although they are not violent, there are some agitators working. And they didn't mention any names, which obviously they won't do, but they said there's about a dozen of Twitter agitators, is the word that they used, who are fighting this debate internationally and nationally, and are spreading conspiracy theories and spreading the Great Replacement theory. And I was just reading that and I was like, this is exactly what the Dutch state media writes about me. Yeah. Exactly the same thing. So 2 + 2 = 4. They're trying to now claim that people who oppose government policies, because that's what they say. They said anti-government activists are a potential terrorist threat.
This is what they say. It doesn't matter if you're peaceful and have always been peaceful and explicitly say that you are and that you just want to use your right to protest. If you oppose them, this is their new tactic. They try to slap the label terrorist on you in some fashion. And this is expanding internationally. And then it's also making it very difficult to travel internationally for anybody who is caught in these crosshairs.
Yeah, of course. Because I mean, it's very clear what they're trying to do. If a government, and I wonder why people don't see this, but if a government says, oh, anyone who criticizes me is a potential terrorist, then, and they use the sort of the cover of democracy for that as well. They say people who oppose state policies in this way, who question the legitimacy of our government, are anti-democratic. And then therefore they are potentially a terrorist threat, even if they're not violent themselves, but they could be the ones to inspire violence in others. You're just, screwed, excuse my French, but it's really dangerous because
absolutely.
They can use all sorts of legal measures against you once you are actually labeled as an enemy of the state. And
Mhm.
they're definitely building that type of case against people who speak out
Yeah.
against dissidents.
You know what? Perhaps this is just the next level because it started with things like, oh, you're a racist, you're a Nazi, you're a white supremacist, whatever. And maybe those things are just wearing off on people. And they're like, yeah, you call everybody that who remotely disagrees with you in any way. So maybe
Yeah.
the next step is terrorists because then people are like, oh my gosh, they must be like, plotting to kill people and whatever. It seems really, really extreme. So people won't really question it. And maybe this next thing the terrorism will wear off soon because people will be like, yeah, you call everybody that. And then we'll see what they bring next.
Yeah.
But
If there is a next, if we're not all locked up by then.
I know, seriously. I'm curious how it's going with the Dutch farmer protest. Is it still going strong? Do they still want to continue this? And if people want to get involved somehow to help and support them, what is the best way for them to do so?
Right. Well, right now, sadly, it's kind of silent. And I don't know exactly why, because the farmers, when this new, revised plan was presented to them a couple of weeks ago, they came forward and said, we're going to protest this because we are never and never will be okay with forced buyouts, with the expropriation plans. So, but we're a couple of weeks later now, and I haven't seen anything yet. So I really, really hope that they will, and that the government's not winning with this tragedy of just, vilifying these people to such an extent that they are afraid to start protesting again because they are afraid that they would have lost the public support. So, I mean, it is very important, and it has been very important so far that our farmers get international support, that you guys cheer them on quite literally. Because as we said, this is not just, a national issue. This is going to be an international issue because it's an international agenda that's being rolled out here. And I feel like people really did understand that when I was speaking about this in the international and especially American media. So we kind of need that support again. Although I do understand that it's hard to support a movement that doesn't do all that much right now. So
Mm.
I'm really rooting for the farmers to start doing something again. Maybe they're plotting something right now that I don't know of, which would be great.
Yeah.
But I really, really hope that people aren't just, that they don't just get tired, which I do understand because, like I said, this is a battle that's been going on for years. These farmers are being pushed around, not taken seriously, vilified. It's a disgrace what is being done to them. But if there's any group that I would say deserves your support specifically, it's the Farmers Defense Force. That's what they're called in English as well. So yeah, Dutch Farmers Defense Force. They are one of the more militant groups, I would say. They're not militant in the sense that they are aggressive in any way, shape, or form, but they understand the agenda that's being rolled out here very well. They know that this is not about nitrogen. They know that this is about their land, and they understand that this is about the Great Reset. And not all farmers in the Netherlands do. I've also spoken to farmers who don't see it that way, who still, they question all the policies, but they're just like, oh, but the government must have good intentions. And
Yeah.
I think that that's a very dangerous approach and a very dangerous idea to still have at this point.
I mean, you can listen to their words, which might be nice, but the important thing lies in their actions and what they're doing, and that's where you can distinguish if their intentions are nefarious or not, which they really seem to be. But I think it would probably be best for people who want to follow along with the Dutch farmers to follow you, since you are so active in promoting their cause. But I know also that you do a myriad of other things. It's not just this, but where's the best place for people to follow you online?
So best place right now would be either Twitter or Instagram. I've been trying to do, I don't know, are you on other apps?
I'm back on Twitter now because Twitter seems like it's a bit of a better place now, but I left it for a while because I was like, this is ridiculous. They censor anything relatively important that you want to say. But I'm back now. I would say Twitter, Instagram, Telegram's good because they will censor you only if you're genuinely saying something illegal, calling for violence, these sorts of things. So you can grow a pretty big Telegram channel.
Yeah, I probably should really do that. I have to get better at these things, but for now it's Instagram and Twitter, and it would be at Eva Vlaar. It's Eva in Dutch, but it's spelled Eva. So
okay, yeah, I'll link it all in the description for people who are interested in following you. But I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And also, I just want to say I think you're doing an amazing job. I'm so happy that you are so active now, particularly internationally. I knew this would happen when I first saw your work. I was like, yeah, she's going to grow really big.
Oh, well, that means a lot from you,
Really
especially
though, because you're so intelligent as well and well spoken, and you know a lot about the issues. You're not just talking about the same talking points that everybody says. Like, you've really done your homework and researched things, and so yeah, I think that you've done wonderful work and are a huge asset to us. So.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Once again, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you would like to support my work, you can best do so on Subscribestar, where I have a private Telegram chat group and private group Discord calls with supporters. I also have an Amazon wishlist, which you can find either in the top pinned comment or the video description. Or you can pick up a copy of my newest book, Patriots Not Welcome, which is available both in English and in German. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you all soon.